Sota Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, Intrinsic Motivation, Mi'ava, Mi'ira. We deal today with one of the most difficult and the most important practices in the field of personal development. Whether it's personal development in one's avodas Hashem, in how one serves God, or it's personal development as a human being, as a father, as a husband, as a wife, as a leader, in a business situation, as a rov, as an educator. This is perhaps one of the most difficult elements to master and one of the most important elements to master as we develop ourselves. And that is the role of feedback. We all need feedback, and we see in the Gemara, we see in Chazal many times that we have to value feedback. You'll remember the Gemara at the end of Yuma. Mahabriyat. What do people say about you? To make Hashem loved by people. How are people reacting to you? How are people responding to you? There is importance in that. And yet, as we'll see, to do things because of the way people respond to us is a problem. And we had the Gemara back on Daf Chaf Beis, and we'll look at part of it again, where we talked about authenticity and doing things for the wrong reason and just not being consistent, not being authentic, not being real. If we're doing things for others, we've got to, the point of mastery is to be able to see feedback as a measurement of success, to see it as an instrument of measurement and not a driver of behavior. And that's incredibly difficult. It's difficult in most areas of life. We get it in some areas of life. So we get it in sports. I play a game of tennis and I win. That's a wonderful feeling. And if there's a big crowd there and I'm a professional player, it's even more wonderful feeling. But is that the reason I play? Do I only play for the win? Or do I enjoy the game? Am I passionate about the game? And if I wouldn't have won, does that mean I should rather not have played at all because it's meaningless and wasteful and it doesn't mean a thing? No, I lost. You've got to do better next time. Is winning a measure of my success, or is it the reason for my activity? Do I play only because of winning, or does winning show I was successful? And I call it an instrument because it's like the instruments on your car. You might have to travel to a destination that's 100 kilometers away, and when your odometer says you've gone 100 kilometers, that's important to know. So you're watching your odometer, 100 kilometers, you've reached to where you need to reach, or Waze tells you you've got to where you need to go. But is Waze the reason you're going? Is the odometer the reason you're driving? It just tells you that you've arrived. It gives you information. And so to use feedback as a source of information, but not as a motivator, is what is incredibly difficult, very hard to do. We're still on the long Mishnah from Daf Chaf Beis, where we had all these various different things that happened on the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed the Nasi after Rabbi Gamliel. And one of them at the end of the Mishnah is Bo B'yom, on that very day, Darash Rabbi Yeshua ben Hurkanus, Lo avad Iyov et HaKadosh Baruch Hu elo mi'ahavo. Iyov served Hashem from a place of love. Iyov's a difficult person to understand. What really was driving him? What really was motivating him? How genuine was his avodas Hashem? There's a lot of discussion on that. And so here in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hurkanus proves that he served Hashem from love, not from fear. And then Rabbi Yeshua says, as he says right through the Mishnah, Mi yigaleh afar meinecha, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. Oh, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, if only you were alive, if we could wipe the dust off your eyes in your grave and bring you back to life, you would have such pleasure to see Shayita Doresh Kol Yamecha Shelo Avad Iyov et Hamakom Ela Mi'ira. Your entire life you taught that Iyov served Hashem only out of fear. V'alo Yoshua Talmid Talmidcho, and Yoshua, your Talmid's Talmid, Lamad Limed Sheme'ava Asa. He worked out from Psukim that Iyov did it from love. He didn't do it from a place of fear. And what pleasure you would have got to see that development. Now, this reminds us of the Gemara back on Daf Chaf Beis, Amud Beis, where we learned, and we had a Matmonim on that, on one of the cases of Mevalei HaOlam, one of the people who confuse the world, who bring confusion into the world, are Parush mi'ahava and Parush mi'yira. A person who is very religious in their behavior, but the religiosity is driven from ahava or yira, from love or fear. And the Gemara goes into the whole issue there. Should they be included? Really, is there something wrong with Ahava and Yira and so on? Rashi here says, our case, when we're talking about Iyov, it's not the same Ahava and Yira from Daf Kaf Bet, 8 pages back. On Daf Kaf Bet, we were talking Dahanu mi'avat scharu yirat puranut klalot va'onshim. There on Daf Kaf Bet, we're talking about people who are afraid of the consequence. They attach to positive consequence and they fear negative consequence. Here we're talking about love of Hashem and awe of Hashem, not yira in terms of personal fear of what will happen to me, but awe of Hashem. This is completely differently. Gemara goes on, the last piece of Gemara on the Perek is based on two psukim. They're both in Tehillim. Ma rav tuvcha shetzafanta lirecha alta lachosim bach neged bnei adam, and v'yismuchu kol chosei vach leolam yiranenu v'tasech alemo v'ya'altzu v'cha ohavei shumecha. The Gemara says, Hanu trei talmidu d'aviyatve kamei derove. There were two talmidim sitting in front of Rove. Chad omalei, one said to Rove, I keep on having dreams, and in my dream they read me the posuk of Ma'arav Tivcha Asher Tzafanta Lirecha, the first posuk. How great is the goodness that they've kept aside for those who fear you. And the other one says, to me they read the posuk of people who will rejoice in you and who love your name. So Rava says to them, you are both great tzaddikim. That this is what you dream about, and these are the psukim that are played to you while you're dreaming. You're both great tzaddikim. But mar mi'ava or mar mi'yiro, there are different types of tzaddikim. One of you comes from a place of avo, from love, and one of you comes from a place of yira. And the Maharsha explains this in a very important way. We're not talking here about the love that Avraham had and Eve had, as we've just learned. If you see there, it says neged b'nei adam in that first posuk. Ma'arav tuvcha asher tzafanti le'erecha pa'alta lachosim bach neged b'nei adam, opposite human beings. Says the Maharsha, so the posuk's implying there's reward for that. It's not as if you're a bad person, but you're doing it for public approval. You're doing it in public. Neged b'nei adam. Dahainu neged b'nei adam v'lo mitzad ava. Your motivation is extrinsic, it's not intrinsic. Yes, you're doing good things and you'll get schar for doing good things, but it's neged b'nei adam. You do it when people are around. When you're b'chadrei chadarim, when you're in the privacy of your own private place, you're not as frum. You shochel more when you daven in public than when you daven on your own. You take longer over your Shmoneh Esrei when you're in public than when you're on your own. It's a different level. But in the second posuk where it talks about people who do it out of love, it says everybody who has bitachon in you, Hashem, here there's no mention of the public. You love the Rebbeinu Hashem, you trust the Rebbeinu Hashem, even if there's nobody there. Whether or not there's fear of punishment, it's got nothing to do with punishment and reward and what people think. It's just an act of intimacy with Hashem. I do what Hashem wants me to do because I love the Rebbeinu Shalom. That there's char and there's onish afterwards is different. That there'll be approval or there won't is different. In other words, yes, there is always consequence. There's char, there's reward, and there's punishment. And that is an indicator, it's an instrument of success. If we're getting rewarded, we're doing it right. If we're getting punished, we're doing it wrong. So our instruments are giving us feedback. But the instrument of measurement should not become the reason for doing. And the ability to separate the measurement of success from the driver of action is this difficult thing that I'm talking about, this very difficult practice that is necessary not only in Avodas Hashem, but in everything that one does. Because the more successful one is, the chances are there'll be more public approval. And the more there is public approval, the more risk there is that you start doing it for the public approval. And then everything changes. It's the same in business. If your customers aren't giving you positive feedback, they don't buy your product. If they don't buy your product, your business is in trouble. But to get to a point where the reason you're in business is not to get your customers to buy your product so that you can make money. The reason you're in business is to make a difference to the world, because it says in Shema V'asafta Deganecha, you need to work. You need to not live on handouts. You need to make a contribution. That's why you're in business. That's why you're doing it. You're doing it in order to support yourself and your family, to be able to learn Torah, to teach Torah, to practice Torah, to make the world a better place. Now, it's true that if nobody's buying your services or your products, something is wrong. That's a measure, and you've got to make adjustments. But when you get up in the morning, that shouldn't be what drives you. Something bigger should be what drives you. And it's that ability to separate that out and to get deep into oneself and say, What is it that drives me? When an artist gets up on a stage and plays his instrument and thousands of people applaud him, that's an amazing feeling. And if the thousands of people would throw eggs at him or would walk out of the auditorium, that would be a terrible feeling. But if you ask the artist, why do you play music? What would he answer? Because I love music. That's why I play music. And so why is it so? But you were very upset. The audience walked out in a huff. They didn't enjoy the concert and you were very upset. If you love music, what do you care about what the audience thinks? No? If the audience walked out, that's a message to me that I need to improve. Something's not right. But that's not the reason I play music. So separating out reason from measure is of primary importance in the way we operate as human beings. Now, if we look on the next page of the sheet, we go back to the Gemara in Brochus, where the Gemara asks, from a posuk of lakachti degani beito, I will take my produce at its right time. It's a posuk in Moshe, I think, v'chati v'asafta deganecho, and it says in the Shema, and you will gather your wheat. Is the wheat ours or is the wheat Hashem's? And the Gemara says, kan bizman she Yisrael osim retzono shemakom, kan bizman she'ein Yisrael osim retzono shemakom. It depends whether the Jewish people are doing Hashem's will or they're not doing Hashem's will. And then the Gemara goes on to say, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, what does vasafta deganecho mean? How can you go and earn a living if you also have to learn Torah? When will you do it? Bizman she Yisrael osim retzono shemakom melachtam na'asat el yedei acherim. When the Jewish people are serving Hashem, their work will be done by artificial intelligence and robots. They can sit in the base of Medrash and their work will be done. But if they're not doing Hashem's will, they're going to have to work very hard. So having to work is a measure of how successful we are. And the Meforshim ask, but what does it say in Shema? Where's V'asafta deganecha? And it will be, if you listen to my mitzvah and you do what I tell you to do, then I will bring the rains, v'asafta deganecha. How can Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai say v'asafta deganecha applies to when you're not doing Hashem's will? Really, you shouldn't have to go to the field and collect your produce. When you have to go into it, it's because you're not doing Hashem's will. Why should that be the case? It says clearly in the Shema v'asafta deganecha, in v'hayayim shamoa. It's not in not doing Hashem's will, it's in doing Hashem's will. And there's a very interesting sefer by a very interesting person about whom we don't know much. Petach Tikva, after the war, was a very big Makom Torah. And I don't know if people realize that. There were two important yeshivas. They weren't very big, but they were very important. Lomja Yeshiva and Or Yisrael. They both came from Europe and established yeshivas in Petach Tikva. The whole new generation of Rosh Yeshivas, my own Rosh Yeshiva learned in Lomja and Petach Tikva. Reb Shimon Rozovsky learned in Petach Tikva in Lomja. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky learned in Lomja. And Reb Yisochem Meir from Netivot learned in Lomja. All the next generation of Rosh Yeshivas learned in Petach Tikva. And one of the yeshivas was Or Yisrael. And the Rosh Yeshiva there was a Rabbi Yaakov Naiman who came from Lida in Belarus and established Or Yisrael in Petach Tikva. And he wrote a sefer called Darkei Musa. And he asks this question also. It's clear, the Shema is talking about when you're doing Hashem's will. How can you say that it's when you're not doing Hashem's will? And Tosfos says in Brochus there, they are and they're not. They're doing Hashem's will and they're not. And he explains, what is it? It says quite clearly there, it's written in the plural. Unlike the first paragraph of the Shema, that's all in the plural. So that's talking about doing Hashem's will when you're part of the community. But when you're on your own in private, you don't do it to the same degree. So you're being driven by an extrinsic motivator. You're doing Hashem's will, but there's an extrinsic motivator. Then v'asafta deganecha, you're going to have to go out to work. But if you can do it from an internal motivator where it's got nothing to do with other people, that would be different. And there's a beautiful piece of Chovos Halvovos where he talks about how you've got to check whether your Avodat Hashem is for other people or it's for you. And he gives you two checks. The one is, who is your audience? It's fine, you're doing it for the audience, you want applause. Is Hashem the audience or people the audience? It's okay to want feedback. Who do you want the feedback from? And the second thing is, if you would do it in any event, if you're sure you would do it, even if there was nobody there, then you know that you're okay. Because he talks about the importance of hiding your frumkeit, says the Chovos Halvovos. Anything that you're doing should not be done in public, unless you have to. It's something you've got to do. Feel a bit tzibur, you've got to do in public. But don't in any way show off. I spent a few wonderful hours yesterday with a very old friend of mine who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Ponevezh, Reb Lezer Kahaneman. And I asked him whether his grandfather foresaw the Holocaust, because his grandfather was saved very miraculously. Did the Ponevezh foresee? Did he see it coming? And he said he doesn't know. He never heard whether he did or not. But one thing he does know is that before the Holocaust, while he was still in Europe, he had terrible dreams and used to be constantly fasting for Tanis Cholam. He was to make a fast for dreams. Day after day after day. And nobody knew that. Nobody knew he was fasting. He said he only heard from his father, who heard from his mother. His mother discovered that her husband was fasting day after day because he had these terrible dreams. He says, that's all I know. I know that he had terrible dreams about Klal Yisrael, but he never spoke about it. Nobody even knew that he had the dreams. Nobody knew. He didn't talk about the fact that he's fasting. Nobody knew that he was fasting. There are things that we do nobody has to know about because we're not doing it for people. And that ability to be able to say, the reason I'm doing this is for a higher purpose. The reason I'm doing this, whether it's the reason I'm in my business, or it's the reason I'm teaching a class, or I'm teaching Torah, or it's the reason I'm playing my musical instrument, or it's the reason I'm playing a sport, or whatever the reason is, I'm doing it for a higher purpose. This is where it comes from. It comes from somewhere very deep inside me. And I would do it whether or not anybody was watching. I would do it exactly the same, whether or not anybody was watching. But if people are watching me and I'm getting good feedback, that's a measure that I'm doing something right. If I'm getting negative feedback, that's a measure that I'm doing something wrong. And a person with self-awareness needs to be clued in to the feedback. He needs to notice whether people are responding well to him or her, or people are not responding well. But that response and that feedback is only a measure of how well I'm doing. It must never become the reason for which I'm doing it. And to be able to keep those two separate is a primary practice in the development of self and the development of self-mastery and in growth in Avodas Hashem.